Hello everybody and welcome back to another one of my reviews. Today I'll be talking about these fins, the Scubapro Seawing Nova. These fins were designed in South Africa in about 2003 as an answer to the then very popular split fins. They were made for those people who did not like them. If you're interested in split fins, I recently made a video where I talk about 4 different ones. Link is in the description below. This particular pair was not also designed in South Africa but also made in South Africa, which I think is quite a nice change from the usual made in China. In South Africa, these fins were also very popular. On a recent trip to Sodwana Bay, fully half of our team used ones in different colors. Now, I've borrowed this pair before and I must admit that when I used them I quite liked them, so I decided to just do a formal review of them. These fins are no longer in production and they have been replaced by the Seawing Supernovas, but at the time Scubapro made 2 different varieties of the fin, the standard ones and those that they called Gorilla. The difference is that the Gorillas were made of a harder compound. They are a stiffer fin aimed more at the more seasoned diver. Visually, the only difference is one of color, where fins that were a bright orange, a dark grey or a dark green were the Gorillas, whereas all the other ones were just the plain standard ones. This one, being black, obviously means it's one of the softer compound, one of the standard fins. So when I first saw these fins I was intrigued by their design because they definitely look very different. And of course the highlight here is these little bridges, or the hinges as they are called. And I looked at that and I said to myself, I can see that becoming a problem because everything, all the power goes through these hinges. The fin just bends through these hinges. So if any material fatigue sets in other words whether it cracks or breaks, this is where it's going to happen. Now, as far as I know, this did happen and Scubapro supposedly just replaced the fins, but they did learn from their mistake. This one is a very old model and you can see here that it still has those little ridges here, those little cutouts, similarly like they have at the bottom. And the idea really was that as the fin bends, these little pieces stop it from bending too much, and similarly going up. However, for the return stroke that really isn't necessary. So what Scubapro did, and you can see it in the photo of the new one, of a newer one, that they reinforced that and made it solid, and that prevented some of that material fatigue. That these fins are so popular shows that this really did work, because a fin that has such a potential serious flaw would not sell that well. When it comes to the fin design, Scubapro talks about it having a wing-shaped blade. Now, I'm not sure what wing they've referred to, but it does have these beautifully curved wingtips over here, which are asymmetrical. They're only on the one side, not on the bottom. And they are of rather critical importance. In order to show you why, I need to bring out a more traditional fin like this one here. So the foot pocket transitions straight onto the blade itself, which is made from 2 different materials. We've got the hard yellow bits over here and we've got the softer rubber bits over here, and that can deform as the blade bends in order to channel the water down and therefore create the propulsion that you need. In the Scubapro that is not possible because of these hinges. The blade just bends but it doesn't exactly deform, so therefore it needs these wingtips over here in order to do that water channeling. The fact that they're asymmetrical is actually a good design, because on the return stroke, when the fin goes up, the water can flow over the edges, therefore reducing the amount of resistance that you experience and making it easier to swim with. I did think that because they are asymmetrical that these wingtips could cause some problems, but I'll talk about those a bit later. Now, when it comes to the design of the hinge, Scubapro talks about something they called pivot control technology, and what that stands for, or what that means is, let me quote directly, is that it ensures the blade maintains an optimal 45-degree angle of attack for consistent power and efficiency. Now, I'm not sure whether they refer to all the Seawings or whether it's just for the Gorillas, the stiffer ones, because I definitely did not find that to be true. If we look at the following clip, you can see me swimming through kelp at a fairly average normal pace, but each time I do a downstroke, the fin doesn't go just to 45 degrees, it goes all the way to 90 degrees. In other words, it goes vertical, and it doesn't do that just once, it does that every time, and that is actually a bit of a problem. Now, all fins bend, and I didn't realize how much until I started making these videos. In the following clip I'm using my Cressi Origins. These are the LD or low density variety, which means they are made from a softer compound, but you can see they also go all the way to 90 degrees. However, the big difference is that I'm going absolutely flat out here, whereas with the Scubapros I was going at a moderate pace. Now, if we compare these fins side by side and slow it down a bit, you can see that the Scubapros start bending earlier and they go all the way to 90 degrees, whereas my Cressis don't. Now, this is at a moderate pace. To me, this is the perfect example of what I mean with torque, because if I were to encounter a surge, I could push harder with the Cressis and still get power out of them, whereas the Scubapros, being at 90 degrees, they really can't give any more power. To me, that makes a difference because I do dive in environments here in Cape Town where we do have surge, and I need to power through those surges in order to keep moving forward. So that's a bit of a downside of these Scubapros. I do think that the Gorillas, being the harder compound, are better at that, but I haven't yet tested that. Practically speaking, does this make a difference on your average dive? Not really. If we compare the fins again side by side, I cover pretty much the same distance and the same number of strokes irrespective of the fin that I'm using. And the Scubapros actually deliver their power in a very pleasant manner. So again, for the average diver on the average dive, if they don't encounter much surge or current, these fins are perfectly fine. So I mentioned earlier on that I might have some problems with these curved wingtips being asymmetrical, and the first one is could you do a frog kick with this fin? So I tried it out and actually it does work. I was thinking that because with a frog kick you use the back of the blade that it might not work, that too much water would spill off, but you get enough propulsion to make it work. So it's really not a big deal. I don't think these fins were made for a frog kick, but if that's what you prefer, you can definitely do that. The second issue is really a minor one, and it impacts just the way that I like to dive. As I mentioned in the previous video, I do what I call sculling, which is just moving my legs like this the whole time. And the reason I do that is because, first of all, I sit in an environment with a lot of surge here in Cape Town, but because I have my camera as well and I want to try and stay stationary, if a surge comes from the side, I can just push against it by just angling my blade. And by constantly moving, it means that I'm ready for that surge. Now, if I look at one of my more commonly used fins, the Cressi Origins, it's got quite a stiff, solid blade and a very low profile over here, which means that it cuts through the water with absolutely zero resistance. And if a bit of surge comes, as I mentioned, all I need to do is just tip the blade a little bit and I can push against it. With the Scubapro, with this asymmetrical fin tip, what I felt was that as I moved sideways, that part actually creates quite a bit of resistance, and because it's asymmetrical, more on the one side than the other side, it really felt like it was kept on twisting the fin. Now it turns out that it didn't really do that, but it just felt quite weird. There was just this odd resistance. Now I think that I would have overcome this eventually because you get used to everything. It was just not as natural as with the Aras to do the sculling. So what is my final verdict on these fins? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, when I tried them first, I quite enjoyed them. They provided me with the adequate forward propulsion. They provided me with enough resistance to know that I was wearing fins. I was going where I wanted to go at a decent enough pace. Yes, they don't have that top end torque that I sometimes like, but that's not really necessary for most people. You can use them to use a frog kick, and quite efficiently so, and that sculling issue that I mentioned, well, that's really just my problem. So all in all, these are good fins, and I can see why they are so popular and why even on the second-hand market these fins are going for a decent amount of money. So what about the title of this video? Scubapro Seawings Nova. Well, in Spanish, Nova stands for it doesn't go, and I think we've established that these fins can give you plenty of go. My question is, did they sell any of these in Spanish-speaking countries? Who knows? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.